I wasn't expecting to discover these feelings at 21. My name is Emma Blake, and until last summer, I was just another college student living at home, planning my future teaching career. Everything changed when Mom started her affair. I should probably describe myself. I'm 5'7" with naturally wavy chestnut hair falling past my shoulders, green eyes that look exactly like Dad's, and a toned body from years of swimming. Growing up, I was always closer to my father than my cold, career-driven mother. Robert Blake, my dad, raised me while she chased partnerships at her law firm. At 45, he still turned heads with his rugged good looks. 6'2" of lean muscle from construction work, strong jawline shadowed with salt and pepper stubble, and those same piercing green eyes I inherited. That fateful morning, I came downstairs in my usual sleep shorts and tank top, hair messy from bed. Dad was at the kitchen island reading the paper, travel mug of coffee by his elbow. The morning sun streaming through the windows highlighted the silver in his dark hair. "Morning, Daddy," I mumbled, shuffling to the coffee pot. When I reached past him for a mug, his workspace scent, a mix of sawdust and spicy cologne, filled my nose. Something fluttered in my belly. Every Sunday morning had the same comfortable routine. Dad made his famous blueberry pancakes while I perched on the counter beside him, legs swinging as we chatted about everything and nothing. This particular Sunday, I noticed how his forearms flexed as he stirred the batter, sleeve tattoos peeking out from his rolled-up Henley. "How's the Watson project going?" I asked, stealing a blueberry. The construction company he owned was renovating an old Victorian mansion. "Would be better if the client would stop changing the blueprints," he chuckled, his deep voice resonating through the kitchen. "Speaking of changes, your mom called. She's extending her conference another week." I scoffed, knowing full well she was with her young associate Marcus. We'd caught them 3 months ago, but she didn't know we knew. Dad had been devastated but stayed quiet for my sake. Since then, our bond had only grown stronger. Each evening, we'd curl up on the couch watching home renovation shows. Sometimes I'd rest my head on his shoulder, breathing in that intoxicating mix of sawdust and cologne. His strong hands would absently play with my hair, an innocent gesture that increasingly set my skin on fire. "You're all I've got, Princess," he'd often say. The nickname made me feel simultaneously safe and something else I couldn't quite name. One night, after a particularly rough day at the construction site, I gave him a shoulder massage. His muscles were like steel under my fingers, and the low groans of relief he made stirred something deep inside me. I found myself lingering longer than necessary, memorizing every curve and plane of his broad shoulders. "God, Emma," he sighed, "what would I do without you?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning. My hand stilled on his warm skin as heat bloomed across my cheeks. When he turned to look at me, those familiar green eyes dark with something I'd never seen before, my breath caught in my throat. Mom's constant absence had left a void we were unconsciously filling with each other. Every shared meal, every casual touch, every private joke, they were all becoming charged with an electricity neither of us dared acknowledge. Mom started noticing changes when she was actually home. I caught her watching us at dinner one night, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass as Dad and I shared private jokes about our latest Netflix binge. "When did you two get so close?" she asked, voice dripping with forced casualness. I was curled in my usual spot next to Dad on the couch, his arm draped casually over my shoulders. "We've always been close, Mom. Maybe you'd notice if you were around more?" The tension grew thicker when Dad started attending my swim practices. I'd see him in the stands, pretending to work on his laptop but always watching when I emerged from the pool, water running down my athletic frame in my team swimsuit. The pride in his eyes made me swim harder, wanting to impress him. Mom confronted me in my room one evening. "Emma, don't you think you're a bit old to be sitting on your father's lap?" I was showing him something on my phone, I defended, though my cheeks flushed, remembering how naturally I'd slid onto his strong thighs, how his hand had rested on my hip to steady me. The breaking point came during a rare family dinner. Dad was telling a story about work, and I finished his sentence, something we'd started doing lately. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. This is inappropriate, she snapped. Robert, she's acting more like your girlfriend than your daughter. You're being ridiculous, Dad growled, but his hand found mine under the table, squeezing reassuringly. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. She's practically sitting in your lap every chance she gets. Mom's voice was shrill. And the way you look at her? Maybe if you weren't fucking Marcus, you'd notice I'm just being a good father, Dad shot back. The house fell silent. Mom's heels clicked down the hallway, followed by the slam of the guest room door. Late that night, I couldn't sleep. The argument replaying in my mind, I padded down the hallway in my silky nightgown. Dad's door was ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the corridor. I knocked softly. Can't sleep either, princess? His voice was husky with emotion. He was sitting up in bed, shirtless, the sheets pulled around his waist. Years of construction work had sculpted his chest and arms perfectly. I crawled onto the bed beside him, like I used to do during thunderstorms as a child. Only now, the electricity in the air had nothing to do with weather. She's wrong about us, isn't she, Daddy? His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder, leaving goosebumps in their wake. Is she? He whispered, his green eyes searching mine. The tension between us was a living thing, crackling with unspoken desires. My hand found his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath my palm. I'm not a little girl anymore, I breathed, shifting closer. No, he agreed roughly. You're definitely not. His large hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing across my lower lip. The touch sent shivers down my spine. We gravitated toward each other slowly, inevitably, like planets pulled by gravity. His cologne filled my senses, mixing with the natural scent that was uniquely him. My nightgown had ridden up, exposing my thighs as I moved even closer. We shouldn't, he murmured, even as his hand slid to my waist. But we want to, I whispered back, pressing against his solid warmth. The lamp cast shadows across his chiseled features as he struggled with desire and duty. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the pulse jumping in his throat. The mounting tension was broken by Mom's heels clicking down the hallway. I quickly slid under Dad's covers, my heart pounding as she passed the door. We stayed frozen, barely breathing, my body pressed against his solid frame. The warmth of his skin against my silk nightgown was intoxicating. Once her footsteps faded, Dad let out a shaky breath. Princess, he whispered, his voice rough with need. We're playing with fire. I traced the tattoos on his chest, feeling his muscles tense under my touch. Maybe I want to burn, I murmured. The words hung between us, heavy with promise. His large hand slid up my thigh, leaving trails of electricity. Once we crossed this line, he warned, but I silenced him by pressing closer. That night changed everything. We explored each other with desperate need, discovering every inch with reverent touches. His construction calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as they mapped my curves. I memorized the taste of his skin, the sound of his groans, the way he whispered my name like a prayer. Dawn found us tangled together, spent and satisfied. The guilt would come later, but in that moment, everything felt perfectly right. The next few weeks were a delicious torture of stolen moments and secret touches. A brush of hands passing coffee, meaningful glances across the dinner table, late-night movies that we never actually watched. Mom grew increasingly suspicious. She started coming home earlier, interrupting our private moments with calculated precision. Her eyes narrowed when she caught me leaving Dad's workshop, my hair mussed and cheeks flushed. Our secret meetings became an art form. Dad would text me about checking construction sites or reviewing renovation plans. Code words that sent thrills through me. I'd meet him at half-finished houses, the sawdust and fresh paint scent mixing with his cologne. We found creative ways to be together. Sometimes he'd pick me up from swimming practice, taking the long way home. We'd park in secluded spots, steaming up the windows of his truck while exploring each other. His rough hands would trace every curve, making me gasp his name. The empty houses he was renovating became our sanctuaries. He'd press me against half-painted walls, lifting me onto kitchen counters that weren't yet installed. We'd christen every room, leaving our mark in ways the future owners would never know. At home, we developed a silent language. A certain look across the dinner table meant meet me in the garage in 10 minutes. A casual brush of hands while doing dishes promised a late-night visit. Dad's workshop became our favorite spot. The workbench had multiple uses we'd discovered. Mom's suspicion grew stronger. She started asking questions about my sudden interest in construction sites, why I was always helping Dad with work. Her eyes followed us constantly, noting how I sat too close to him on the couch, how his hand would linger on my lower back. "You smell like your father's cologne," she remarked one evening after I'd snuck back from the workshop. I blamed it on hugging him goodbye, but my flushed cheeks told another story. We knew we were playing a dangerous game but couldn't stop. Every stolen moment, every secret touch, every clandestine meeting just made us want more. Dad would whisper promises against my skin as we moved together, our bodies fitting perfectly, like we were made for each other. The morning everything shattered started like any other. I was in his workshop, perched on his desk, wearing one of his flannel shirts, when his expression suddenly changed. "Emma, we need to talk." His voice was different, strained, formal. My heart dropped instantly. "What's wrong, Daddy?" I reached for him, but he stepped back. The distance between us felt like miles. "This has to stop." He ran his hands through his silver-streaked hair, refusing to meet my eyes. "What we're doing, it's destroying this family. Your mother knows." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't care if she knows. We love each other." "No," he cut me off sharply. "I'm your father. I was supposed to protect you, not this." His voice cracked. "I've failed you as a parent." "You haven't failed me." I slid off the desk, trying to close the gap between us. "What we have is real. Special." "It's wrong," he whispered, though his hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to reach for me. "You deserve a normal life, Emma. Someone your own age. A real relationship you don't have to hide." "I don't want normal. I want you." The tears were flowing freely now. "Please, Daddy, don't do this." He turned away, his broad shoulders tense. "I've already called a contractor in Seattle. I'm transferring the Watson project to them. I'm leaving for a while." The world stopped spinning. "Leaving? For how long?" "As long as it takes." His voice was hollow. "Until these feelings fade. Until we can be father and daughter again." I crumpled to the workshop floor, his flannel shirt swimming around me. "You promised you'd never leave me," I sobbed. "You said I was all you had." And when he finally turned back, there were tears in his green eyes so like mine. "And that's why I have to go, because you're my little girl, and I've corrupted that." He started walking away, each step echoing in my heart. At the door, he paused. "I'll always love you, Princess, but not like this. Never again like this." I stayed there on the floor until night fell, clutching his shirt, breathing in his scent until my tears ran dry. Mom found me there hours later, but said nothing. She knew she'd won. The first attempt to get my dad was a week after his announcement. I showed up at his new apartment wearing a sundress that left little to imagination. His eyes darkened when he saw me, but he stepped back. "Emma, go home." But I wasn't giving up. Each day, I found new ways to test his resolve. I'd accidentally run into him at construction sites wearing tiny shorts and his old work shirt tied at my waist. His jaw would clench as I bent over blueprints, asking innocent questions. During mandatory family dinners, I'd play footsie under the table, watching him grip his fork tighter. Once I dropped my napkin just to crawl under and torment him. I started swimming at his gym, emerging from the pool in my smallest suit, while he tried desperately to focus on his workout. His eyes would follow water droplets trailing down my body. Late nights, I'd text him photos of me in his old shirts that he'd left behind, saying I couldn't sleep. Just wanted to say goodnight, Daddy, I'd write, knowing what those words did to him. One evening I brought him dinner, wearing a silk robe that accidentally slipped off my shoulder. He gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. "Princess, please," he'd beg. "We can't." Every rejection hurt, but I saw how much it cost him. The way his hands shook when I got too close. How his breathing changed when I called him Daddy. The hunger in his eyes before he'd turn away. I left lipstick marks on his coffee mug, wore his favorite perfume, bent over in front of him every chance I got. Each time he'd close his eyes and recite what sounded like practice lines. "You're my daughter. This isn't right. We need boundaries." But his resistance only made me want him more. I knew his routine. Every Thursday he'd drop by to pick up more work clothes while Mom was at yoga. That evening, I left my door slightly ajar, knowing he'd have to pass by. The soft buzzing sound filled my room as I arched on my bed, intentionally loud enough for him to hear. "Daddy," I whimpered, making sure my silhouette was visible through the gap. His footsteps stopped outside my door. I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the slight creak of wood as he gripped the doorframe. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw his shadow lingering, heard his ragged breathing matching my own. "Please," I moaned, knowing exactly what I was doing to him. The shadow at my door shifted, and I could practically feel his internal struggle. For a long moment, only the soft buzzing and my breathless sounds filled the air. Then I heard him whisper, so quietly I almost missed it. "God forgive me." But instead of entering, his footsteps retreated quickly down the hall. The front door slammed moments later. I lay there frustrated and alone, knowing I'd pushed him to his limits, but still hadn't broken his resolve. The next day he texted, "Moving to the Seattle site permanently. Don't try to find me." That Thursday evening, I meticulously prepared my trap. I knew he'd come by at 6:30 while Mom was at hot yoga. His footsteps were always so distinctive, heavy boots on the hardwood that made my heart race. In my bedroom, I positioned everything perfectly. Door slightly ajar, soft lamp casting suggestive shadows, my silk robe discarded strategically on the floor. The new toy I'd bought specially hummed softly, as I made sure to be vocal enough for him to hear. Daddy," I moaned when I heard his boots on the stairs. The footsteps faltered, then continued slower. As he approached my door, I arched on the bed, letting my hair fan out across the pillows. "Please, Daddy," I whimpered, watching his shadow appear in the doorway. He stood frozen there for what felt like eternity. I could hear his breathing getting heavier, see his white-knuckled grip on the doorframe. The wood creaked under his strong fingers. "Princess." His voice was strained, barely a whisper. I heard him rest his forehead against the door, struggling with himself. I continued my performance, making sure he could see my silhouette writhing on the bed. "Need you so bad," I breathed. His shadow shifted, and for a moment I thought he might enter. I heard fabric rustle as he adjusted himself, a soft groan escaping his lips. "Daddy, please come here," I begged, infusing my voice with need. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. His breathing was ragged now. "God forgive me, I can't." For several long minutes he stood there, fighting his desires. I could practically feel the heat radiating from him through the gap in the door. His internal battle was palpable in the tension-filled air. Finally, his deep voice broke the silence. "I love you too much to destroy you like this." His boots moved quickly down the hall. I heard him practically running down the stairs. Then the front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later with a text. "Leaving for Seattle permanently tomorrow. Don't try to find me. This has to end, Princess. I'm sorry." I lay there clutching my phone, the toy forgotten beside me, tears streaming down my face. In trying to seduce him back, I'd pushed him away forever. In my desperation to see him one last time before Seattle, I drove to his apartment that night. His truck was packed for the early morning departure. Finding his door unlocked, I slipped inside. "Emma," he warned, standing shirtless in the dim kitchen. His muscles tensed as I approached. "Just let me say goodbye properly, Daddy," I whispered, slowly sinking to my knees before him. His resistance crumbled as I gazed up with pleading eyes. "We shouldn't," he groaned, but his hands found my hair as I showed him just how much I'd miss him. The taste of him was intoxicating as I took him deeply, desperately. His fingers tightened in my hair as his breathing grew ragged. "Princess. Oh God," he moaned as I worked him skillfully with my mouth and tongue. I hummed in satisfaction as he lost control, his hips moving rhythmically. When he finally reached his peak, calling out my name like a prayer, I savored every drop of his essence. Rising slowly, I kissed him deeply so he could taste himself on my tongue. "Now you'll never forget me," I whispered against his lips before walking out the door. His text came an hour later. "That was the last time. Goodbye, Emma." Thunder cracked outside his apartment as I made my last desperate attempt that night. His truck was already packed, boxes and construction gear visible through the rain-streaked windows. Finding his door unlocked, I slipped inside, dripping wet from the storm. "Emma," he warned, voice rough. He stood shirtless in the kitchen, illuminated by a single light above the stove. The shadows emphasized every muscle, every curve I'd memorized with my hands. "You shouldn't be here." "Just let me say goodbye properly, Daddy," I whispered, moving closer. Our eyes locked, green meeting green, as I slowly sank to my knees before him. His breathing hitched, hands clenching at his sides. "We can't. Not again," he groaned, but made no move to stop me as I gazed up with pleading eyes. My fingers traced the V of his hips, following the trail of dark hair disappearing into his jeans. "Let me taste you one last time," I breathed, working his belt open. His resistance crumbled as I freed him, already hard and straining for my touch. "Princess, we promised." But his hands found my hair as I took him between my lips. The familiar taste of his skin made me moan softly. His fingers tightened in response, guiding my movements as I showed him just how much I'd miss him. I took him deeper, desperately memorizing every detail, his masculine scent, the way his muscles trembled under my hands, the soft sounds of pleasure he tried to hold back. His hips began moving rhythmically as I worked him with lips and tongue. "Emma. Oh God," he groaned as I hummed around him. Thunder crashed outside as he lost control completely, his fingers tangling roughly in my hair. When he finally reached his peak, crying out my name like salvation, I savored every drop of his essence. Rising slowly on shaky legs, I kissed him deeply, letting him taste himself on my tongue. "Now you'll never forget me," I whispered against his lips, feeling him shudder. "Every time you think of Seattle, you'll remember tonight. Remember how perfectly we fit together." I walked out into the storm before he could respond, mascara running with rain and tears. His text came an hour later. "That was the last time, Princess. What we had was beautiful but wrong. Please don't follow me to Seattle. Let me do the right thing for once. Goodbye, Emma."